Continuamos con la segunda mesa de esta primera jornada, de este 10º aniversario, este Open Fest del Open de Arbitraje. La mesa número 2, ofrecida por Freshfields Bruckhaus Deringer, Hydrogen Horizons, Navigating Disputes Related to the Fuel of the Future. Es una mesa que será en inglés. Si tenéis un nivel de Ana Botella no hace falta traducción simultánea, pero si no es vuestro caso, hay ahí también equipitos de traducción simultánea. ¿Hacia dónde va la energía verde? El hidrógeno o el biogás serán sin duda la energía del futuro. ¿Qué conflictos hay y habrá detrás? Para moderar esta mesa pido un fuerte aplauso para Noiana Marigo, socio de Freshfields Bruckhaus y Deringer. Bienvenida.
Good morning everyone. Okay, as we said earlier, this panel is made up of both English and Spanish speakers, but we'll be speaking in English.
Everyone, and thank you, Javier. Thank you to the Open for this invitation. It's always a pleasure to be here, and I always say the Open is the most fun and dynamic arbitration conference ever. No offense to the rest of the people who organize conferences. So we have today a fantastic panel. We're going to talk about hydrogen. We have Jesús Silvestre Turner, que es Legal Counsel for M&A at Cepsa Madrid. Welcome. We have Carmen Ainoza, Business Development Manager for Gough Group. Hello, Carmen. We have Óscar Arnedillo, who is Senior Director at NERA Consulting. And we have Kate Gough, which is a partner at Freshfields in London, and she specializes in complex construction disputes and advisory. So as a way of introduction, I thought, we were going to start with that. I think we can all agree today that climate change is no longer a problem of the future. Actually, we're seeing today in real time all of the effects that the scientists were forecasting for a long time, unfortunately. And we can see the ice cap melting, the sea levels rising. We see a very sad picture, and I hope we can reverse that. We have longer and more frequent heat waves. We have storms, wildfires, really a kind of dark picture, and you might be thinking, why are we starting with such a pessimistic view, this panel? The reason is because now we're going to turn into something that is more optimistic, because we're going to talk about hydrogen, as I was telling you. And this is going to be a way to help the world reach the goal of net zero emissions in the future, and hopefully save some of the bears that we have in this picture. We have an amazing panel today. They're going to tell us all about hydrogen. This is a new field, so not all of the lawyers are really up to date with these topics, and I think it's going to be very interesting to hear from all of us. So just to provide a little bit of background to the discussion that we're going to have today, I thought about putting together 7 interesting facts. I tried to have 7 facts, but I stopped at interesting. So preparing for this panel, I learned that hydrogen is actually the most abundant element in the universe. And here we have to go back to our chemistry days in school, and basically let me tell you that hydrogen represents roughly 90% of the atoms that we have in the universe today. Hydrogen is very versatile, and today is being used mostly to create products like gasoline and petrochemical products derived from the refined oil. But they have many more uses, and we're going to discuss them today. Can be used for heavy industry, can be used for power generation, for heating, for residential and commercial heating, and for transport, including cars, trains, shipping, and even aviation. In the future, we might have planes that are going to be fueled by hydrogen. Important fact for the discussion today, hydrogen produces no carbon emissions at the point of use, and very low or even no emissions at the point of generation, depending on how it is generated. And we're going to see that today. Hydrogen is colorless, however, and I don't know why, but the industry had decided to classify hydrogen in different colors depending on how they are produced. And today we're going to learn about that. And the main point is that if we want to reach the goal of decreasing or limiting the increase in global temperature by 1.5 degrees in this century, which seems to be a very difficult goal today to attain, we need more sources of green energy. And hydrogen will play certainly a very critical role in that. We see already a lot of demand. The demand is set to double by 2030, and mostly it's going to be seen in an increase in the power generation, in industrial uses, and as I was saying, transportation. We're going to see it requires a lot of infrastructure, a lot of investments, and to attract that investment, of course, we need regulation, and that's where I think the next important step has to happen. How states are going to regulate so that investors feel comfortable investing and developing this sector. And as in every sector where we have investments, where we have construction, and we have contracts, we will have disputes. And this is part of the discussion today, as we are all arbitration specialists. We're going to explore what kind of disputes we're going to see in this sector. So with all this information in mind, let me get directly to our discussion. And maybe we'll start with Carmen. Carmen, you are an engineer by training, and you have a lot of experience in the sector, and I'm sorry you have to be here among so many lawyers today. But for those in the audience who are not familiar with the hydrogen industry, could you tell us in very simple terms for lawyers, not engineers, how hydrogen is produced and what types of hydrogens do we have today?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, good morning. This is a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. Here on the earth, plants, water, animals, even humans, we contain a large number of atoms of hydrogen. But although it is is present in almost all the molecules of the living beings, hydrogen as a gas is very scarce. So as Noiana mentioned before, hydrogen is the most abundant chemical element in the universe. But since it is not found as a free form, it must be produced. This is the case. Using hydrogen, we can obtain large amount of energy without CO2 emissions. And also, as well, we can manufacture chemical products with high added value, such as ammonia, methanol, etc. More or less, it's in a general speaking. Depending on the process used to extract the hydrogen, we can talk about renewable or non-renewable source. Okay? So to understand this at a glance, the hydrogen color code was created. It's a code, it's not a really color. The hydrogen is the same hydrogen. What do we mean when we talk about gray hydrogen? Gray hydrogen is obtaining by passing natural gas through water vapor using an steam reforming technique. In short term, we use fossil fuels for this gray hydrogen, and of course we generate CO2 in this production. This is the cheapest way for produce hydrogen. It is around, the prices are around 1 and 1.5 euros per kilo. And this is the typical and the most used of hydrogen used today. But according to the International Energy Agency, in 2022, 94 million tons of hydrogen were produced in the world. But this production has led to the emission of 900 millions of tons of CO2. So it is cheap now, but will be very expensive in the future. So, and then there is another color. What is blue? Blue hydrogen. In the production of blue hydrogen, we use also natural gas, but in this case, we also use different technologies to reduce or eliminate the carbon footprint in the production. So, blue hydrogen is a hydrogen of low emissions, but of course the prices in this case are around 5 euros per kilo. Okay. Then, what do you think, it's easy the question, but what do you think is green hydrogen? It is possible to break down the water into hydrogen and oxygen using electricity. This is called water electrolysis. This is a typical name that you have sometimes listened before. Water electrolysis. So green hydrogen is the hydrogen obtained with water electrolysis using renewable energies and without CO2 emissions. The question is that currently the production of the total production in the world of hydrogen of low emission is only 1% currently. There is another fashion color, is pink. Pink hydrogen is also the hydrogen obtained with water electrolysis, but using nuclear energy. This is another question, nuclear energy. So more or less, there are two big groups. Hydrogen in the production of hydrogen, if we have CO2 emissions, or there is another group where the production of hydrogen is without CO2 emissions. This is, in general terms, the explanation about the different kind of hydrogens.
Thank you. Like in other aspects of life, the better, the more expensive.
Yeah.
Oscar, you wanted to add?
Yes, I would just like to point out that this distinction is kind of more of a production-oriented and marketing distinction. The European Commission is moving away from that type of definition based on rainbows and colors, and is considering three different categories. And I'm saying this because obviously the European Commission defines the regulations by which subsidies, etc., are paid out. And which eventually will define whether there will be, disputes and arbitrations, and it has to do with, what the bidding zone. I mean, there's three types of hydrogen according to the Commission. There's renewable or clean hydrogen. There is low carbon hydrogen, and there is fossil-based hydrogen. For renewable hydrogen to be considered renewable, it has to come first. Produced by electricity from the grid, it has to come from, bidding zones which meet certain characteristics. Or alternatively, it has to come through certain commercial arrangements which, mean that you can undertake an investment thinking that you're going to have green hydrogen, and then at the end of the process, the hydrogen is not actually considered green. And that obviously is going to affect the economic viability of the project and is going to lead to disputes.
And Óscar, you're also not a lawyer, but you've been focusing on the industry for a long time. You're an expert in climate change. Of course, hydrogen is not a novel industry, and we've seen that has been around for a long time.
Yeah.
What do
Yeah.
you think is becoming so the focus of interest today?
Yeah, the interest on hydrogen obviously comes primarily in Europe from the desire to fight climate change. Obviously, it also affects energy independence. You know, the United States has tried to achieve energy independence by building aircraft carriers and having a very powerful army, whereas we go for energy independence as a way to increase our security of supply. So when you think about reducing your energy dependence, you have several ways to do that. You can reduce your demand for energy, you can increase your efficiency, but that only takes you so far. Another thing that we could do to decarbonize would be to capture the CO2 and store the CO2. But then again, there is limits to how much CO2 you can store, and there are concerns about the long-term stability of that storage. So then, you know, you could think about biofuels, but biofuels compete for land use with agriculture, and can increase the price of certain foods, you know, agricultural products. So really, the only way to decarbonize in a sustainable way would be to supply our energy needs via electricity, produced with renewable energy sources such as solar and wind energy. If that was the end of the problem, hydrogen would only have a role in the electricity system as a way for seasonal storage, because obviously there's more sun in the summer, less sun in the winter, but the demand for energy, you know, does not follow that nice pattern. However, there is also a need for hydrogen, or there's a logic for hydrogen to continue to be in the system because there's certain uses where electricity is simply not viable. And you're thinking about aircrafts, you're thinking about long-distance transportation by truck, you're thinking about shipping, you know, and there's also industrial processes that need high temperatures which cannot be achieved with electricity. So even though electricity would be the most economical, it is not practical to use electricity for the uses. And that's where the interest in hydrogen comes in. One place where we will not see hydrogen is in our homes, simply because, you know, you may think, well, I use natural gas in my home, how am I going to heat my home? Unfortunately, we have what we call heat pumps. These are like air conditioning machines, which will, you know, heat up your house by taking heat from the outside of the house, with efficiencies which are, you know, 400, 500%. So, you know, you're not going to see hydrogen there. You're not going to see distribution networks for hydrogen in the cities. But other than that, there is a huge need for hydrogen in the economy as part of our decarbonization and energy independence efforts.
It's clear from what we're discussing that we need to develop the hydrogen sector. But so it's clear that we will need to develop the sector if we want to decrease the CO emissions and hopefully save the planet or make it last longer. But there are a lot of challenges because it's a huge need of investment, it's a huge need of incentive from the states, need for certainty in the regulation. But what are the challenges, the main challenges that Carmen and Óscar you see in really developing this industry in the future?
Okay, thank you. From the engineering perspective, we are facing two major challenges. First of all, prices and the constraints of the development of large new infrastructure. Considering prices, if the production of green hydrogen becomes 50% cheaper by 2030, as predicted by Global Hydrogen Council, we will see hydrogen as a fuel of the future, but the prices must reduce 0.5%. Also, current cost of the hydrogen is high, or seems high, compared to those of the fossil fuels. Technological advantages and the favorable momentum that we are living are paving this scenario is favorable for greater competitiveness. So I am optimistic in this way. It is good to remember that all the technological advances that have had to happen for us to enjoy the technological advances that we have today. So we have to evaluate that we have to do the challenges to reach this goal. So we need to reimagine the way the world produces, consumes, and prices the energy. This is a new strategy. This is a new energy system that we have to redesign. So a multilateral push from regulators, investors, technologists, politicians, and of course, above all, lawyers, is needed. All together, the collaborative way. So I don't know if you...
Yeah, I think to add to Carmen's answer, I think there are significant regulatory risks that can prevent the proper development of the industry. In particular, I am worried about the government providing subsidies to projects which don't make much sense, that the cost of the fight against climate change will increase, and that therefore there will be a popular backlash from consumers and from industry, which suddenly face huge increases in the cost of energy, forcing the government to do U-turns in certain policies and leaving some investments stranded. In particular, I am concerned about the hydrogen corridor that the Spanish government has been pushing to supply hydrogen from Spain to Germany through pipelines for hydrogen of thousands of miles, kilometers, undersea, etc. When in fact, I believe that there is no question that it is much cheaper to produce the hydrogen in Germany and consume it in Germany than it is for the hydrogen to be produced in Spain, transported to Germany. Not to talk about the security risk that I think for Germany would present the risk of an explosion in the pipeline, in the gas pipeline, like they had the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline. So there is a risk that we will devote a lot of money to projects that may not succeed, that don't make any sense, and that there will be a regulatory backlash, changes in regulations, similar to what we had with renewables in Spain in the years 2013 and 14, and which have led to more than a decade of arbitrations and disputes.
And talking about regulations and how difficult it is to navigate all that, Jesús, in your role in Cepsa, you have been leading a lot of M&A projects in the hydrocarbon sectors. Can you tell us about your experience in navigating the regulation? What are the main challenges that you've seen? Is there enough regulation? Do we need more? Is it clear? Is it complicated? How do you interact with the different regulations in different countries or continents even?
Definitely. Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Noiana, and I'd like to thank the Open and Freshfields for inviting Cepsa to this panel. Precisely, becoming a leader in the production of green hydrogen is one of the pillars of the positive motion strategy in Cepsa, so we really appreciate the opportunity. And as regards the regulatory framework, it has been mentioned in the previous panel and also here, something that investors need is certainty and a stable regulation. At the end of the day, we are setting up a new hydrogen ecosystem, And what we need is certainty in the regulation. And to be honest, now the framework of rules is not clear. You have a lot of them. You have a piece of legislation here, a piece of legislation there, but you don't have like a law on green hydrogen or a directive on the market of green hydrogen. So focusing on the applicable regulation, and I will speak about Spain and Europe, that is where we are located, I think it makes sense to make a difference between the European regulation. First of all, in July 2020, the European Commission launched its hydrogen strategy. And one positive thing about it is that it has set out very clear targets about green hydrogen that has been even increased with Repower EU plan caused by the Ukraine war. I won't mention all the targets, but just for you to have an idea, the European Union aims to produce 10 million tons of green hydrogen in the European Union and import 10 million tons by 2030, which is obviously quite ambitious. In terms of the European regulation, I'd say that from 2020, many things have been done. I would highlight two work streams. The first work stream has to do with supporting investment. Within the European Union, there are many schemes of grants, subsidies that support investment and revenues. And while talking about certainty, just to let you know that this approach is quite different to the approach in the regulation in the United States, because the European Union is more focused on demand and quotas, whereas the United States in the Inflation Reduction Act is focused on tax credits. However, not only do we have elections in Europe this year, we also have elections in the United States. And if Trump wins the elections, well, there are certain doubts whether or not the Trump administration will continue with this line of tax credits of the Biden's administration. And continuing with the European regulation, just to highlight that in 2023 there was something very important. Óscar has mentioned it. It was the two delegated acts, where it has been defined what green hydrogen is for Europe. So you can imagine that the definition of the product has a huge impact in all business models, and it will apply in the European Union, but it will also apply to the hydrogen that is imported. Talking about the Spanish regulation, the situation is pretty much the same. Some amendments to regulations, pieces of legislation here and there, but at the end of the day, you want to set up a plant for the production of green hydrogen. The regulation is the same as an industrial activity, so you need all the permits, license, authorizations for land, concession of water, environmental assessment, of course. So in conclusion, I'd say that a lot has been done within the last years, but there is still a lot to do about the regulation of this new industry.
And I understand that when we're talking about green hydrogen or the source of production, we will need to certify what kind of product we have. Is there already a consensus on how to certify it? Do the regulators know how they're going to enforce the rules for production of green hydrogen when it's imported from other countries, for example?
Good question. And well, actually, those delegated acts, they set out a scheme of certificates, voluntary schemes of certificates to prove that your hydrogen has been produced with green hydrogen. In Spain, Enagas is making a big effort in this regard, and I think that this particular field is something that we have to work on it in the future.
We will need a lot of trust between the countries to make that work. Talking about trust and collaboration, one of the things that for me was surprising when I was looking at the industry, it was like the level of JVs that you have that first of all, you need big investments. You need a lot of coordination. And you see JVs of companies that normally are competitors and now are joining forces to develop a new industry. I'm sure you have experiences at Cepsa with that. Can you tell me how are the big players in the field going about collaboration and the type of characteristics that you see in the JVs today that might differ from other transactions?
Sure. Well, indeed, we need partnerships to scale and to speed the process of creating this new industry, green hydrogen industry. Firstly, because sometimes you cannot do everything by yourself, but mostly because in this new industry, you need to align all the players in the chain value and all of them benefit from the project. So you won't imagine how complex it is to line up everyone that has to say yes on the same date, the investment decision, because it's not only about the commercial agreement or the concession, but it has to do with the financing, if we're talking about project finance. So the complexity is enormous. It's almost like a moon landing. But it's a way of doing it, because in traditional industry, oil and gas, you could focus on a piece. I'll do shipping, I'll do refining, but here you really need to align all the players in every part of the value chain. We have quite an experience in Cepsa. We are already setting up some collaborations with main players within Europe. Just to give you some examples, we are working with C2X to set up, which is aimed to be one of the 5 largest plants of green methanol in Europe, and it will be set up in Andalusia. We are also collaborating with Fertiberia. Fertiberia and Cepsa are currently consumers of hydrogen, and the idea is to decarbonize both companies and do it together. With Yara Clean Ammonia as well, we will have a plant to produce ammonia in the south of Spain and then bring it to the north of Europe, also with Asia terminal in the port of Rotterdam. The idea is a green corridor from the port of Huelva to Rotterdam, and then bump it, the product to the north of Europe. And going even in addition to all this, the complexity of the agreements, the matrix of agreements, because you have the PPAs, you have the EPC, the O&M, the supply agreements, land agreements, and on top of that, of course, you have NDAs, MOUs, term sheets, investment and shareholders agreement. So, well, in conclusion, I would say it's a dream come true for litigation lawyers.
And I see, Carmen, you've been saying yes.
Yes, we
is that the
collaborate
same
also with Cepsa, but it is true that in energy projects or in chemical projects, this is the common constraints, but in this case, this is a new market, and there are other new players where normally we don't play before. Yeah. So yes, we collaborate also with Cepsa in the Green Hydrogen Valley in the south of Spain as engineering. So we know very well all the constraints about the technologies, etc., even with the other players.
Cooperation between players is essential.
It's crucial,
this
yes.
kind of project.
And so we're saying that it's very complex. We have all these JVs. It's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of construction that is involved, a lot of financing that is needed. So Kate, this is the perfect scenario for a lot of disputes. Can you tell us what you have been seeing in the sector in terms of the issues that are being brought to disputes or litigation, and what other issues you see in the future are going to appear?
No, thank you. I think it's sad to take it to the disputes now, because it's such a positive story and such a positive industry to be involved in. I think the reality, though, is all the things that are so exciting and difficult are the things that are potentially going to lead to the disputes. So I think the first really is the JV. It is quite particular, I think even more than in the context of other renewable projects. It's quite particular how we're seeing the structuring. It's the same in the UK market. I'm involved in a very complex JV for blue hydrogen right now with two parties who would have never, ever have worked together in a different context. And I think that is the first place where we're going to see disputes. And I think that's because we have to really focus on governance. We have to really understand what the parties are bringing together. You talked about the value chain. If you're looking all the way through the value chain, does everybody know their part? Does everybody know what they're bringing to this JV? And how are you going to have a governance arrangement that sits in there that really allocates that risk, that liability, that responsibility, and of course the benefit? So I think sadly, as these things are so complex to deliver, the value chain is quite hard to determine, and also the pricing. We have no spot pricing. We have no clear off-taker. We also can't really transport it, as you said, the idea that you can pipe it long distances. It's very difficult. So JVs. I'm afraid JV disputes, old-fashioned JV disputes in a very new place. And then technologies. They are obviously very established technologies in relation to electrolysis, but there's not established technology tying it into your chain. So how do you get it from here into the transport? How do you really focus on having cheap blue and green and pink hydrogen? How do you even situate your pink hydrogen next to your nuclear plant in a way that's safe? That's something that we are really struggling in the UK market. We have a huge renaissance of nuclear energy and a real focus on wanting to make that part of a true net zero approach. But actually, how do you do that? And how do you have the technology? And so when there's new technology, there's risk. And I see there being disputes, again, at all stages of project delivery in relation to that technology risk. We would normally, in my world, ask for a technology wrap from your EPC contractor. We would say, this is your problem, you wrap it. There is no way in the market we are going to get a full technology wrap through an EPC approach. So we're going to have to come up with new ways of working. We're going to have to look at new contract models and new delivery structures, and that will lead to disputes. We can try and mitigate them, we can try and get it right, but I think technology and how we wrap the risk around technology through the value chain, that's really important. Predictability of revenue. You know, at the moment, we understand the historic uses. You know, I've seen it in methanol, ammonia. We want to use it in this new world, but really, who is going to buy it? What is the revenue going to be? And how are we going to understand revenue where the pricing is difficult for the future? So again, that creates risk. How are you going to price it? How are you going to have revenue? And then good old-fashioned construction risk. Project on project and construction risk. I think if you have a technology and all of this being built in a very complicated regulatory environment, you're going to have project and construction risk and what we would call project on project risk. So how do you tie it into the transport? How do you tie it into the elements of design? So I think, I'm afraid, or maybe good for me, but significant construction disputes are coming. And then the regulatory piece you were talking about. There is enormous uncertainty. There's no one way of regulating and supporting hydrogen. The UK market is very different to the EU, which is very different to the US. And the US may be very different in December to it is today. And that is difficult to create market appetite, to go all in this industry where you have that regulatory underpinning that is not certain and that support. And I'm afraid that will also lead to changes and that will lead to disputes. So they're my top ones for today.
Óscar, you were mentioning earlier on the renewables experience. So like hydrogen is incipient now, but we've seen all this momentum already with the renewables, with the first wave. We saw already a lot of the disputes, particularly in Spain and related to the subsidies. Is there anything from that experience that can be used to either avoid or improve the way we do things this time?
I think there are similarities with the renewables, and also there is quite a lot of dissimilarities with renewables, as Kate was saying. With renewables, much of the dispute, obviously there's the construction disputes, land disputes, etc., but much of the disputes came from regulatory changes, where the government was guaranteeing revenues and did a U-turn. And that may happen with hydrogen, but hydrogen is a much more complex industry. We're not just thinking about, setting up an electrolyzer and that's it. You obviously need to do that, you need to procure the raw materials, the critical materials, the palladium, the platinum, you need the skills, but you need to do that not just for the electrolyzer, but you also will need to procure the energy, so you may need to build, your own renewables or take electricity from the grid, and you may need to have, and you will need to have access to water. And there may be limitations to how much water you can draw on, and then you have to build your own desalination plant to then have the water to feed into the electrolyzer to produce the hydrogen. So there's a lot of there's pipelines to transport the hydrogen. So there's a lot of complexities there. There's a lot of different organizations and different interactions and sources for conflict. In terms of, we'll have the sort of engineering, procurement, construction disputes, obviously. We will have the problems with, electrolyzer manufacturers failing to provide the electrolyzers, or problems with the quality of those electrolyzers. We'll have disputes about cost overruns. We'll have disputes about quality. We'll have disputes about timing, which, by the way, timing is one of the things that can lead to a project which is conceived as a renewable project, not to be considered a renewable project, because if more than a certain amount of time elapses between the construction of the hydrogen plant and the construction of the renewable plant, then it doesn't meet the European Commission additionality requirement or temporal correlation requirement. There is, I think, I see different stages in the development of the hydrogen industry, which are going to lead also to different types of disputes. In the initial stage, which is where we are now, what we will see is large investments with a lot of agents involved, supplying to large industrial customers with dedicated pipelines. And that's kind of similar to the long-term gas take-or-pay contracts that we have seen that we're seeing, or we saw more in the past than now. And then there's going to be disputes over price reviews. If the electricity is supplied by a renewable plant which is dedicated, to try and meet the renewable requirement, we have the problem of, there's more hydrogen being produced in the summer than in the winter. You can address that with some storage, but there's only a limit to how much storage it is economic to have. And then it may be that you don't have the hydrogen to supply to your industrial customer at some point, or you will have excess hydrogen. Maybe how do you sort out that problem? Do you have another source of hydrogen? Is it green hydrogen or renewable hydrogen as well? Is it a different type of hydrogen? What are the consequences of that different type of hydrogen for the consumer? Because the value of their products may be linked to what type of hydrogen they use. There is also, if the electrolyzer is fed from the grid, thinking, well, I'm going to reduce my cost by buying electricity when it's cheap. Well, electricity may not be cheap forever. There's hours in which the price is zero or even negative, but there's times when the price is very high. And then there's going to be disputes about cost. There's going to be regulatory changes that affect the electricity market, for example, which are going to affect the price that the electrolyzer has to pay, and that's going to lead to disputes. So, there's that first stage of development with large projects and large customers. There's a second stage where I think industrial consumers will develop their own electrolyzer facilities because there's no economies of scale, and because you save the cost of having to transport the hydrogen to your facility. It's easier to take the electricity from the grid and produce your hydrogen than it is to have the hydrogen produced somewhere else and then brought as hydrogen to your own facility. And also there may be issues or efficiencies that can be achieved with the use of heat that comes from the electrolyzing process. So in that at that level of the development of the industry, I think the types of disputes are going to be the types of disputes that we see with combined heat and power plants, with the operation of those plants, the availability of those plants, what happens if the plant is not available. And in a third stage, we may see the repurposing of natural gas transmission networks, and we will have more of a spot market for hydrogen, and I think the disputes there will kind of decline. So in terms of the types of problems that we will have, they will change over time. There will be arguments about the price of hydrogen or the value of hydrogen when it's renewable, when it's not renewable, etc. But I think the answer is there's going to be loads of disputes, nothing that we haven't seen up to now except the problem of how to value different types of hydrogen.
Yeah, we're almost at the end, but just to link it to the discussion we had earlier in the first panel, I think if we think about the need for investment, the uncertainty of the regulation, the relationship with the government, the subsidies that might be implemented and then withdrawn, is going to be very important to the investors to look into treaty structuring to make sure that they not only have the protection of good and robust contractual protections, but also international law protection for their investments. And we saw it in Spain with the renewables. I think we might see in the future another wave, and it's the more important seeing ACMEA within Europe and how difficult it is to enforce arbitrations now within Europe and the withdrawal from the energy charter. So the field is very complex at the moment. And just to finish, one question to Jesús and Carmen. Are you thinking of treaty structuring when you are doing these investments or not yet?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, you have to consider everything. So yes, and that's why sometimes we need external lawyers as well. So definitely.
We are pushing as much as possible. We are trying to get the goals together with Cepsa and other customers. So from the technological point of view, we are reducing prices, reducing scheduling for being aligned with the requirements. So from the technological point of view, there are a lot of things to do, but we are optimistic. We can do it.
Okay. Thank you very, very much. I think it's clear that it's a very exciting, very new area where we're going to see a lot of disputes, which is good news for the lawyers, but also very good news for environment, because if we make this work, we might be closer to preserving the planet. Thank you, everyone.